Let me give you now some key words that will help us to prepare for good communications. Key words. Number one, interest. To prepare for good communications, take a new interest in life. Here's a good pledge to make at the beginning of the day. I'm going to be more interested in this day. I'm going to see if I can get more from the day. Boy, it's easy if you're not careful to just try to get through the day. But sophisticated people learn to get from the day. They don't want a day to go by without gathering up some new ideas, some new impressions, new color, new nuances, new sense of worth and value. They gather from the day, interest. And here's two of the major subjects to study with interest, life and people. Develop a new, sharper interest, new, sharper focus on life and people. What's happening, what's going on. Now, that new commitment to a new interest for the day will get you ready for the years to come with better communications. Because to say it well, you have to feel it well. To say it well, you have to know it. And to know it, you just got to go through the laborious process of gathering, extracting the information. So that's the first word, interest. Here's the second word, fascination. A bit beyond just simple interest. Interested people are probably satisfied that it ticks. It ticks. And that's good to know. It ticks. But fascinated people want to know what? What makes it tick? Fascinated people aren't satisfied usually with surface information. They've got to know more than just what appears. What's really going on? The hippies had a pretty good question in the 60s. What was it? The hippies. Good question they had. What's happening? That's a good question. What's happening? And sophisticated hippies say, what's really happening, right? What is really going on? What's making things tick? What's making things happen? Why do people feel like they do and think like they think? What is the difference between success and failure? Who has the appetite and who doesn't have the appetite? This whole fascination about life and people and circumstances and society and money and banks and churches and sermons and books and records and life experiences and enterprise and nations and color and races and religion and a whole fascination for this wide panorama of life and life experiences. I'm telling you, if you'll take a new fascinated look at life and what's going on, it will now show up in color and sharpness in your future communications. It'll have a new reach and a new depth. It'll have a new insight, a new excitement. Now, I've got a good experiment for you to try. The next time you're tempted to be frustrated, see if you can turn it into fascination. How to turn frustration into fascination. That's a good skill to try to learn. I'm sitting on the freeway in Los Angeles. My airplane leaves in 45 minutes. The traffic is not moving an inch. I am now fascinated. I'm telling you. Now, it doesn't work every time. I'm willing to admit that. Nothing works every time. But can you imagine the extra value you'll get from a frustrating experience if you just think about this? Can I turn this frustrating experience into something fascinating? I'll learn a lot more from it if I'm fascinated by it than just frustrated by it. So just try that little key. Try to turn frustration into fascination. And in a frustrating experience, if a smile comes across your face, other people will wonder, what's going on? But it'll just be private between you and me. The man taught me how to be fascinated, if possible, in a frustrating situation. Okay, turning frustration into fascination. The extra learning discipline, the extra learning skill. And I think this is part of it. Here's the next key word. This is a big one. Sensitivity. To really communicate well and to touch people in a wide range and from a wide range of experience, you've just got to have felt the experience. It's got to be part of you. Sensitivity training. Being touched by a wide range of human experience, perhaps even beyond your own. Incredible words said about the master teacher, Jesus. It said he was moved. Wow, that's a key word. It said he was moved with compassion. What was happening moved him. It touched him. Another phrase said he was touched. He was moved. He was affected. On more than one occasion, he cried. So part of that human drama of experience, I think, for us to really be able to reach people and touch people with words and ideas and emotion and phrases and sentences loaded with feelings, we've got to go into this area of sensitivity, being touched, being affected by our own lives as well as the lives of other people. Sensitivity, being touched, being moved. This is part of the heavyweight stuff that starts to show up now in our language and in our communication. I've lived a rather sheltered life all my life, so I've had to really work on this. What do I know about tragedy? I've never had any tragedy. But part of the world is tragic. Part of life is tragic. And if you don't at least try to understand the dark side of life, the tragic side, the extreme sorrow side, your life is left a bit shallow. And sometimes when you live such a sheltered life, you just have to try to go outside of your own small world of sheltered experiences and see if you can't live as someone else might have lived, or at least try to be touched by the experience. Now, you can't really know till you live it. I understand that, but at least you can try. And if you do your homework here in sensitivity for a wider range of experience than your own, I promise you that extra worth will show up in your conversation and in your communication. When I lived in Northern California, I used to go to San Francisco 2-3 times a year, spend a day in the Tenderloin. For a farm boy from Idaho, the Tenderloin in San Francisco, what an experience. And if you just go spend a day, you get to see what we call the other side. And if you just spend a day there and walk the streets where those lonely walk, and go eat where they eat, and listen to some of those stories, you come away with a whole new sense of the great distance between failure and success. The whole distance between goodness and evil, between despair and joy. And you come away with more of a sense of value, because the true values of life come by the contrast. And unless you experience more of the contrast, even the values you consider valuable become a bit shallow if you don't understand the contrast. It's hard to really appreciate winning until you've done some losing. It's hard to appreciate success until you've done some failing. And if you've done some failing, success now becomes a much larger worth and value and commodity if you understand a bit of the other side. So part of this is just deliberately go where experiences beyond your own touch your life to get somewhat of an education as to the contrast of life and the differences. It'll educate your mind and educate your spirit. And sure enough, that extra worth will start showing up in your sentences and your words. And they'll be weightier. They'll be heavier. They'll mean more when you talk to somebody. I met Frank, the bartender, in the Tenderloin. Frank is a bartender in this sleazy little bar. You wouldn't believe this place. Frank sees more tragedy in a week than most people see in a lifetime, if you work in one of those places. I'm visiting Frank one day, and Frank and I are talking. Frank says, "See that lady sitting over there on the bar stool?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "How old do you think she is?" I said, "She's 45. Frank says, "She's 25. I said, "Wow." He said, "That's Cookie. Her name is Cookie." He said, "Cookie used to be a go-go dancer back in the go-go days. But then," he said, "Cookie developed some kind of bone disease in her legs and her hips. And," he said, "now she's had all kinds of operations with the bolts and the pins trying to hold her together. And says, now she's a cripple and she can hardly walk. So her go-go days are over." And sure enough, Cookie was very crippled. Frank says, Cookie also has a little boy, 5 years old, and he's dying of leukemia. So he said, Cookie comes several times a week, sits on that bar stool, and plays a little music to try to cheer up her life. And she usually drinks far too much, and gets wasted, and I have to call a taxi to come and take her home. Wow, I thought, Cookie. How come her life worked out like that and my life worked out like this? How come I get to travel around the world and Cookie finds it hard to even get home? That kind of exposure, that kind of sensitivity, that kind of study. Now, you can't really know it unless you live there. I understand that. But you can go a great deal into trying to understand a wider range of human experience And if you will try to let those experiences touch you, let them affect you, let them educate you, let them give you a broader range of emotional wealth and worth, I'm telling you, that extra worth will start showing up in your language, in your words and in your sentences. And you'll be able to touch people that you couldn't touch before. You'll be able to reach people you couldn't reach before you had the experience. Your words will have more of a drawing than they had before just by going through some of these experiences. So I'm asking you to consider the word sensitivity and ask yourself, what could I do and what experiences could I make sure that I engage in that would give me a broader range of understanding of human suffering as well as human joy, of the dilemma as well as the confidence, of the joy as well as the sorrow, of the success as well as the failures of life, and try to gain an understanding in a broader sense, and let that have an effect on your future ability to touch and reach somebody else. Key word, sensitivity. Here's number 4, knowledge. Good communication starts with this laborious task of gathering knowledge. And I've got a parenthesis for you to make, working knowledge. Knowledge that you deliberately gather that will work for you in the future. This is why Shoaff taught me to keep these journals. He said, gather working knowledge. Knowledge that you go back over. Knowledge that you review. Ideas that you go back through one more time to see if you can't find the extra meaning, the extra depth, the extra worth, the extra value. Working knowledge. Your library, the books you read, the deliberate attempt to broaden your understanding. That's very important in bettering your communication skills. An ever-increasing amount of the refinement of intellect. That's so important, this working knowledge.